The hum of the engine was a familiar lullaby as I turned onto our street, the setting sun casting long, orange shadows across the neat lawns. It had been a particularly grueling day at the office, a marathon of meetings and spreadsheets, and all I craved was the quiet comfort of home. The thought of Ilara, my wife, and our spirited 5-year-old daughter Lily was the only thing that had kept me going. I pictured Ilara's warm smile, Lily's excited squeals as she recounted her day, the aroma of whatever delicious dinner Ilara had conjured up. It was my sanctuary, my refuge from the chaos of the world. But as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The usual vibrant energy that spilled from our home was absent. The front door was slightly ajar, which was unusual for Ilara, who was meticulously careful about security. A prickle of unease started at the back of my neck. I cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the growing apprehension within me. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and pushed the front door open wider. "Ilara, Lily, I'm home!" My voice, usually booming with cheerfulness, sounded strangely muted in the quiet house. No joyous rush, no little feet thudding across the hardwood, just an unnerving stillness. I walked into the living room, my heart beginning to quicken its pace. And then I saw her. Ilara was curled up on the sofa, a small, crumpled figure, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs that tore at my soul. My breath hitched. This wasn't Ilara. My Ilara, strong and resilient, the woman who faced every challenge with grace and a fierce determination, was utterly broken. Her usually vibrant auburn hair was disheveled, clinging to her tear-streaked face. The air around her felt heavy, thick with a palpable sorrow. "Ilara, what happened? Are you okay?" I rushed to her side, dropping my briefcase with a thud that echoed in the quiet room. I knelt before her, trying to gently pull her hands away, my mind racing through 1,000 worst-case scenarios. Had there been an accident? Was someone hurt? "Talk to me, honey, please." She finally lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red, her cheeks blotchy. A raw, guttural sound escaped her lips, a broken whimper that twisted my gut. She tried to speak, but only choked sobs came out. Her gaze was distant, unfocused, as if she were reliving some horror. It was a look I'd never seen on her face, a look of profound violation and despair. Just then, Lily padded into the room, her small face etched with confusion. She clutched her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles, and her big, innocent eyes darted between her mother and me. "Daddy, why is Mommy crying?" Her voice was a soft, bewildered whisper, and it was like a knife to my heart. How do you shield such raw pain to a child? How do you shield her from a world that could inflict such hurt? I scooped Lily up, holding her close, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "Mommy's just a little sad, sweetie. We'll make her feel better, okay?" I stroked Ilara's arm, my touch gentle, but my mind was a storm of questions. Who could have done this? What could possibly have reduced my strong, beautiful wife to such a state? My protective instincts flared, a primal anger beginning to simmer beneath my worry. Ilara eventually managed to point a trembling finger towards the kitchen. The garden," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "My roses." My heart sank. Ilara's rose garden was her pride and joy, her sanctuary. She spent hours tending to it, nurturing each bloom with a love that bordered on obsession. It wasn't just a garden, it was a testament to her patience, her creativity, her connection to nature. To see it damaged would be devastating, but this level of anguish suggested something far more insidious than a simple accident or a stray ball. I handed Lily over to Ilara, who, despite her own distress, instinctively wrapped her arms around our daughter. "Stay with Mommy, sweetie," I murmured to Lily, then turned towards the kitchen, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I walked through the kitchen, my gaze drawn to the back door, which was also slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about roses. This felt like a violation. Stepping out into the backyard, the vibrant colors of Alara's meticulously arranged flower beds usually greeted me with a burst of life. Today, a scene of utter devastation lay before me. The air itself seemed to hum with the lingering scent of crushed petals and disturbed earth. Her prize-winning hybrid tea roses, the ones she had carefully cultivated for years, were not just damaged, they were systematically decimated. Stems were snapped, petals scattered like confetti after a cruel party, and the rich, dark soil was churned up as if someone had deliberately tried to uproot the very essence of her joy. It wasn't random, it was malicious. Each broken stem, each torn leaf seemed to scream of a deliberate act of destruction. My eyes burned with a fury I rarely allowed myself to feel. This wasn't just vandalism, it was an attack on Alara's soul. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to piece together what could have happened. There were no signs of forced entry on the back door itself, but the fact that it was open and the garden so thoroughly ruined suggested someone had been here. My gaze drifted upwards to the small, discreet security camera mounted under the eaves of the house. A wave of cold resolve washed over me. The camera, of course. It covered the entire backyard and the back door. It would have seen everything. I rushed back inside, the image of Alara's shattered face and Lily's innocent confusion burning in my mind. I found them still on the couch, Alara holding Lily tightly, her tears now a silent stream. "I'm going to check the cameras, Alara," I said, my voice low and steady, trying to convey a sense of control I didn't entirely possess. She nodded, her eyes still clouded with pain, but a flicker of something, perhaps a desperate hope, passed through them. My home office, usually a haven of quiet productivity, felt like a war room as I powered on the computer and accessed the security footage. My fingers trembled slightly as I navigated through the interface, selecting the backyard camera feed. I fast-forward through the early afternoon hours, seeing only the gentle swaying of leaves and the occasional bird flitting across the frame. I watched the timestamp tick by, my heart pounding in my chest, a terrible anticipation building. Then, at precisely 2:47 p.m., the screen showed movement. A figure. My blood ran cold. It was Sarah Jenkins, our next-door neighbor. Sarah was, in a word, a piece of work. She was the kind of person who always had to one-up everyone, whose compliments were backhanded, and whose entire existence seemed dedicated to maintaining a pristine facade while subtly undermining anyone she perceived as a threat. She had a perfectly manicured lawn, a perfectly coordinated wardrobe, and a perfectly insincere smile. Alara and I had always tried to be cordial, but her passive-aggressive jabs about Alara's overly ambitious gardening or unconventional artistic pursuits had always grated on us. She'd always seemed to view Alara's success and happiness, particularly with her garden, as a personal affront. Lately, she'd been campaigning hard for a position on the local community board, plastering her face on flyers around the neighborhood, promising to bring order and aesthetic excellence to our quaint suburb. Watching the footage, I saw Sarah approach our back fence, her head swiveling furtively, checking if anyone was around. She was wearing gardening gloves, which struck me as odd, as her own pristine garden was on the other side of her house. She then, with a shocking casualness, unlatched the small gate that separated our properties, a gate we only ever used with mutual permission, which was rarely given or sought. She stepped onto our property, a smirk playing on her lips, a glint of malicious satisfaction in her eyes. My stomach churned. This wasn't an accident. This was premeditated. She walked directly towards Alara's rose garden, her movements deliberate, almost performative. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look remorseful. With a chilling calm, she reached down, grabbed a handful of Alara's most cherished rose bushes, and snapped the stems with a sickening crunch. Then another, and another. She wasn't just breaking them, she was tearing them apart, pulling out entire sections by the roots, scattering the soil with a malicious glee. It was brutal, systematic destruction. She even took a small trowel from her pocket and began to dig, not to plant, but to uproot and fling the dirt with a vindictive flourish. My vision blurred with a red haze of pure, unadulterated rage. I watched, horrified, as she continued her rampage for what felt like an eternity, though the timestamp indicated only a few minutes. She took obvious pleasure in the destruction, occasionally glancing back at our house, her expression a mix of triumph and contempt. It was clear she knew Alara was likely home, or at least nearby. This wasn't just about the roses. It was about making Alara feel powerless, about invading her safe space and destroying something she loved deeply. It was a calculated act of cruelty. Then, the worst part. Alara appeared in the frame, drawn out by the sounds. She had been in her art studio, lost in her work, and had only just realized the commotion. Her face, initially curious, twisted into an expression of utter disbelief, then dawning horror. She gasped, a sound I couldn't hear but could clearly read on her lips, and took a step forward, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah, seeing Alara, didn't flinch. Instead, she paused, looked Alara directly in the eye, and with a slow, deliberate motion, snopped the stem of Alara's prize-winning, blushing pink rose, the one Alara had been cultivating for a major local flower show. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated spite. Then, with a final, triumphant glare, Sarah tossed the broken stem at Alara's feet, turned, and calmly walked back through the gate, latching it behind her as if she'd merely been admiring her own garden. Alara stood there for a long moment, frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. She slowly sank to her knees amidst the wreckage of her beloved garden, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The camera captured it all: the injustice, the pain, the complete and utter devastation. That was when Lily had likely come out to see what was happening, only to find her mother in that state. I slammed my fist on the desk, the sound echoing sharply in the small office. My breathing was ragged, my jaw tight. This wasn't just property damage. This was a personal assault, a deliberate act of psychological torment. Sarah had not only destroyed Alara's garden, but had also stolen her peace, her sense of security, and left her utterly vulnerable. The rage that had been simmering now boiled over, a cold, hard fury that demanded retribution. I walked back into the living room, the laptop still open in my hand, the damning footage playing on a loop. Alara looked up, her eyes still red-rimmed, but now with a fragile hope. Lily was asleep in her arms, exhausted by the day's emotional turmoil. "I saw it, Alara," I said, my voice low and tight with suppressed anger. "I saw everything. It was Sarah." A fresh wave of tears welled in Alara's eyes, but this time it was different. It wasn't just sadness. It was a realization, a validation of her pain. I couldn't believe it," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. "She just stood there and watched me. And then she broke the blushing pink, the one for the show." Her voice trailed off, the injustice still fresh. "She's going to pay for this," I stated, the words a solemn vow. "She's going to pay for every single tear you've shed, for every broken rose, for every moment of peace she stole from you." Alara looked at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "What are you going to do? I don't want trouble, honey. We just want to move on." "Moving on isn't forgetting, Alara, and it's certainly not letting her get away with this," I said, my gaze hardening. "This isn't about trouble. This is about justice. This is about protecting our home, our family, and your peace of mind. She targeted you, Alara. She thought she could get away with it because she's Sarah, the perfect neighbor. But the camera never lies." I spent the rest of the evening brainstorming, the laptop with the footage still open beside me. Calling the police felt like an option, but I knew how these things often went. Property damage, a slap on the wrist, maybe a fine. Sarah would deny everything, play the victim, and continue her subtle campaign of malice. No, this required something more, something that would hit her where it truly hurt: her meticulously crafted reputation, her social standing, her ambition to be on the community board. She thrived on appearances, on being seen as the benevolent, upstanding citizen. That's what I would target. I meticulously edited the footage, creating a concise, damning video. I added timestamps, zoomed in on her face, on her deliberate actions, on the moment she looked Alara in the eye and snapped the final rose. I even added a title card: "The True Face of Sarah Jenkins, A Neighbor's Cruelty Unmasked." My plan began to take shape. Sarah was holding a major Meet the Candidates fundraiser at her house the following Saturday, a grand affair she had been promoting for weeks, designed to showcase her impeccable hospitality and community spirit. It was the perfect stage. I reached out to a few trusted neighbors, people I knew had also experienced Sarah's subtle toxicity or had seen through her facade. Mr. Henderson, a retired police officer, had always been wary of her. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose cat Sarah had once accidentally locked in her garage for a day, harbored a quiet resentment. I showed them the footage, explaining Alara's distress. Their reactions were a mixture of shock and disgust. "I knew she was a snake," Mr. Henderson muttered, his jaw tight, "but this is beyond the pale." Mrs. Rodriguez simply shook her head, her eyes flashing with anger. They'd agreed to help. Over the next few days, I worked quietly, almost stealthily. I printed out flyers, not with Sarah's face, but with a QR code and a short, intriguing message. "Curious about your community board candidate? Scan for the truth." I made sure they looked official, almost like a campaign ad. My goal wasn't to vandalize, but to expose. I also created an anonymous social media account, linking to the video, and started subtly sharing it within local neighborhood groups, framing it as important information for voters. I ensured the video was downloadable and easily shareable. On the day of Sarah's fundraiser, the air was buzzing with anticipation. Her house was adorned with balloons and banners, a stark contrast to the quiet devastation in our own backyard. Cars lined the street, and a steady stream of well-dressed guests flowed into her meticulously manicured property. Alara, though still fragile, had a quiet determination in her eyes. She hadn't asked me to stop, seeing the cold resolve in my own. She knew this wasn't just about revenge, but about reclaiming her peace. Lily was at her grandmother's, safely away from the unfolding drama. My part of the plan was simple. As guests arrived, Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Rodriguez, along with a few other sympathetic neighbors, discreetly placed the flyers on car windshields and slipped them into mailboxes, blending in with the general hubbub. The QR code led directly to the video. I, meanwhile, kept a low profile, watching from our living room window. Within an hour, I started to see the first signs. People, now inside Sarah's party, were pulling out their phones, scanning the codes. Whispers started, heads turned, frowns replaced smiles. A few guests, their faces pale with disbelief, started making their way out of the party, casting disgusted glances back at Sarah's house. Sarah, oblivious at first, was holding court on her front porch, charming potential voters with her practiced smile. But as more and more people started leaving and the whispers grew louder, her smile began to falter. She noticed the phones, the hushed conversations, the increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere. Then, one of her campaign volunteers, a young woman who looked utterly mortified, rushed up to her, holding out a phone with the video playing. Sarah's face, usually so composed, crumpled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking ashen. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted towards our house, then back to the phone. The perfectly curated facade shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The party, which had been so lively moments before, dissolved into a chaotic exodus. People were openly discussing the video, their voices no longer hushed. "Did you see what she did to Alara's garden? And the way she looked at her, pure evil. And she wants to be on the community board? Absolutely not." By the time the sun began to set, Sarah's grand fundraiser was a ghost town. The balloons drooped, the banners looked forlorn, and the silence that descended upon her house was deafening. Her political ambitions, her carefully constructed image, her entire social standing were utterly demolished. The video, now viral within the neighborhood, was spreading like wildfire. She was exposed, publicly and undeniably. I watched it all unfold, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was about righting a wrong, about protecting the woman I loved, and about ensuring that maliciousness didn't go unpunished. I walked over to Alara, who was now standing by the window, a small, almost imperceptible smile gracing her lips. The raw pain in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet strength. "Are you okay?" I asked, wrapping my arm around her. She leaned into my embrace, her head resting on my shoulder. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. I think I can start planting again." And she did. Over the next few weeks, with my help and even a few genuinely kind neighbors offering their support, Ilara began to rebuild her garden. The new roses she planted were a symbol of resilience, of beauty rising from the ashes of cruelty. Sarah, on the other hand, became a pariah. Her campaign was abandoned, her name a byword for hypocrisy and malice. She rarely left her house, and when she did, her eyes were downcast, unable to meet the gazes of her former admirers. The silence of her once bustling home was a constant reminder of her downfall. The crisp autumn air held a familiar chill, but it was nothing compared to the icy dread that had settled in my heart. My daughter, Sophia, was getting married, and Richard, my husband, and I, her parents, were not invited. The words still echoed in my mind, delivered with such a casual, almost dismissive tone, as if she were discussing the weather rather than severing the most fundamental bond. "It's just not the vibe we're going for, Mom. You guys bring a certain energy." A certain energy? The energy of two people who had dedicated their lives to raising her, loving her, sacrificing for her? It was a wound that festered, deep and personal, poisoning every moment of my waking life. Sophia had always been a vibrant child, full of life and a certain undeniable spark. But as she grew, that spark transformed into something sharper, a self-centered ambition that often left us feeling like supporting characters in her grand narrative. Richard, ever the optimist, always believed she would outgrow it. "It's just a phase, Eleanor," he'd say, squeezing my hand. "She'll come around." But Sophia never truly did. Her desires became demands, her requests entitlements. We indulged her, of course, as parents often do, hoping that our boundless love would eventually temper her more difficult traits. Then Julian entered her life. He was everything we disliked. Charming on the surface, but with eyes that scanned rooms for opportunities, not connections. He had a slick smile that never quite reached his eyes, and an air of practiced nonchalance that screamed entitlement even louder than Sophia's. He was a real estate agent, always talking about deals and investments, but his lifestyle seemed to far outstrip his actual income. Richard, with his quiet wisdom, saw through him immediately. "He's a predator, Eleanor," he'd warned, his voice low and serious. "He sees Sophia as a stepping stone, not a partner." I tried to talk to Sophia, gently, carefully, but she was infatuated. She accused us of being jealous, of not wanting her to be happy. The distance between us grew, becoming a chasm that felt impossible to bridge. The engagement announcement was a lavish affair, funded almost entirely by us, of course, because Julian's family isn't really into grand gestures, Mom. We swallowed our discomfort, smiled for the cameras, and toasted to a future we already felt a profound sense of foreboding about. But even then, we held on to hope. Hope that once the initial excitement wore off, Sophia would see sense, or at least remember the love that bound us. That hope shattered a few months later. Sophia called, her voice bright and airy. "Mom, so the wedding details are coming together. It's going to be at the Harrington estate. Super exclusive, you know. Julian knows the owner." My heart swelled, imagining the beautiful day, walking her down the aisle, seeing her happy. "That sounds wonderful, darling," I managed, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "We're so excited." There was a pause, a slight hesitation on her end. Then, the words that would forever scar me. "Yeah, so about that, Julian and I have decided to keep it really small, intimate, just our closest friends, you know, and, well, we just don't think it's the right fit for you guys." The phone almost slipped from my numb fingers. What do you mean, Sophia?" My voice was a whisper. Richard, who had been listening from the kitchen, walked in, his brow furrowed with concern. "I mean, you're not invited, Mom. Look, it's nothing personal. It's just, you guys can be a bit much, and Julian really wants a specific aesthetic. We're going for minimalist chic and, well, you know." My breath caught in my throat. "Minimalist chic? Is that what you call your parents, Sophia? Not the right fit?" Richard stepped forward, his face pale. "Sophia, what are you saying? We're your parents. We've always been there for you." Her voice hardened. "Exactly. Always there. Always in our business. Always judging. We just want one day without all that. It's our day, not yours." And with that, she hung up, leaving a deafening silence in our home. Richard held me as I sobbed, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that leave you hollow. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the casual cruelty, the dismissal of decades of love and sacrifice. It was the realization that our daughter, the girl we had poured our entire being into, saw us as an inconvenience, an accessory to be discarded when she sought a specific aesthetic. The pain was physical, a constant ache behind my ribs. For weeks, we walked around in a daze. Friends called, expressing their shock and sympathy. "She'll come to her senses," they'd say. "It's Julian, he's clearly manipulating her." But the calls from Sophia never came. Instead, we saw snippets of her wedding planning on social media, carefully curated posts of dress fittings, venue tours, floral arrangements. Each photo was a stab to the heart, a reminder of the life we were explicitly excluded from. She was beaming, Julian by her side, living out a fairy tale that felt like a deliberate mockery of our pain. Then, the audacious call came. Not an apology, not a reconciliation, but a demand. Sophia's voice, once again, bright and devoid of any remorse. "Mom, so the final catering bill is astronomical, and Julian's family is being surprisingly tight-fisted. We were thinking, since you guys aren't coming, you could still contribute, right? For old time's sake? Maybe a check for, say, $50,000? It would really help us out." I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. Richard, who had been listening on speaker, looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, then narrowed with something cold and dangerous. "Sophia," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you disinvited us. You told us we were not the right fit, and now you're asking us for $50,000? Her response was immediate, laced with a familiar whine. "Well, it's tradition, isn't it? Parents contribute to the wedding. And besides, you guys have always been so comfortable. It's not like you'll miss it. It's our big day, and we shouldn't have to stress about money." That was it. The final straw. The audacity, the sheer unadulterated entitlement. Richard took the phone from my hand. His voice was calm, almost dangerously so. "Sophia," he said, "we will consider your request. We'll get back to you." He hung up before she could respond. We stood in silence, the weight of her words heavy in the air. The pain was still there, but now it was accompanied by a searing, righteous anger. We had been hurt, humiliated, and now brazenly exploited. The time for grieving was over. The time for action had begun. "She wants money," Richard said, his voice hard. even after everything. She sees us as an ATM, Eleanor, and Julian, he's pulling the strings. I nodded, my mind racing. We can't let them get away with this, Richard. Not after everything. We looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. Our daughter had chosen her path, and in doing so, had paved the way for our own. Her big day was approaching, and we knew, with a certainty that chilled us to the bone, that it wouldn't be the joyous occasion she envisioned. Our revenge wouldn't be loud or violent. It would be surgical, precise, and aimed directly at the heart of their greed and hypocrisy. We began to gather information. Julian's background was surprisingly murky. A few discreet inquiries, a private investigator recommended by a friend, and the pieces started to fall into place. Julian had a history of short-lived, financially advantageous relationships. He'd left a trail of small-time bankruptcies and disgruntled ex-partners, always managing to extract something before moving on. He was a professional charmer, a master manipulator, and Sophia, blinded by his attention and her own desires, was his latest mark. We also had Sophia's own words, her text messages, her emails, all detailing her casual dismissal of us and her brazen demand for money. The evidence mounted, painting a picture of calculated self-interest and a complete disregard for family. We didn't want to destroy her life, not truly. We wanted to open her eyes, to expose the truth about Julian, and to make her understand the consequences of her callous actions. But more importantly, we wanted to protect her, even if it meant being the villains in her story. We knew this would be the end of our relationship with her, but it was a price we were willing to pay to prevent her from making an even bigger mistake. The wedding day dawned, bright and clear, a cruel contrast to the storm brewing within us. We didn't plan to crash the ceremony itself. That would have been too chaotic, too easily dismissed as bitter parents making a scene. Our plan was more subtle, more devastating. We had arranged for a trusted, discreet friend of ours, a distant relative of Julian's family who was invited, to be our eyes and ears. She carried a small, elegantly wrapped gift, inside which was a discreetly placed USB drive. On that drive, we had compiled our carefully gathered evidence: Julian's financial history, his past relationships, screenshots of Sophia's brazen texts demanding money even after disinviting us, all meticulously organized and presented. The plan was to have our friend, Clara, hand the gift to Julian during the reception, a seemingly innocuous gesture. She would whisper a coded message, something about a late wedding present from an admirer. Julian, ever the opportunist, would be intrigued. He would open it later, perhaps in private, and discover the truth. The timing was crucial. It had to be after the ceremony, after the vows were exchanged, when the illusion of their perfect union was at its peak. The fall would be so much harder then. We spent the day in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of our own lives, but our minds were miles away, picturing the grand estate, the smiling guests, our daughter in her white gown. Every hour felt like an eternity. I thought of Sophia as a little girl, twirling in a princess dress, her laughter echoing through the house. The contrast with the cold, entitled woman she had become was heartbreaking. Richard held my hand often, a silent comfort, his own face etched with a mix of sorrow and grim determination. Finally, the call came from Clara. Her voice was hushed, a mix of shock and a strange kind of satisfaction. "Eleanor, it's done. I gave him the package." He looked intrigued. She described the lavish reception, the opulent decorations, Sophia radiant and oblivious, Julian preening, basking in the glow of his supposed triumph. She told us about the speeches, the toasts, the carefully orchestrated facade of their perfect love story. My stomach churned with a nervous anticipation that was almost unbearable. About an hour later, Clara called again, her voice now filled with barely contained excitement. "Eleanor, you won't believe it. Julian just exploded. He's yelling, screaming at Sophia, right there in front of everyone. He found the drive. He accused her of knowing, of trying to set him up. He's saying she's a gold digger too, that she was just as bad, trying to use him for his connections. It's absolute chaos. My heart leapt into my throat. What about Sophia? What's she doing? She's crying, Eleanor. Hysterical. She's yelling back, denying everything, saying she had no idea. But then someone, I think it was Julian's sister, found one of the texts from Sophia on the drive, the one where she asked for the 50,000, and she read it out loud. Oh, Eleanor, the silence. Then the whispers. The guests are murmuring, some are leaving. The music has stopped. It's a disaster. I could hear the distant sounds of shouting and a woman's wails through the phone. Clara continued, her voice grim. Julian is packing his bags. He's saying the wedding is off. He's calling her a manipulative little witch. Sophia is screaming that he's a con artist. It's a full-blown meltdown. The Harrington estate, the exclusive vibe, it's all gone. Her big day, it ended right there. Richard and I listened, our faces pale, our hands clasped together. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, sorrow, a bitter satisfaction. We had succeeded. We had stopped the wedding, exposed Julian, and, in a way, exposed Sophia to herself. But the cost was immense. The image of Sophia, hysterical and heartbroken, even if it was self-inflicted, pierced my soul. Clara stayed on the line, giving us updates as the chaos unfolded. The caterers were packing up, the band was packing up, guests were awkwardly excusing themselves. The dream wedding, the culmination of Sophia's carefully constructed image, had imploded in spectacular fashion. Julian, true to form, had vanished, leaving Sophia to face the wreckage alone. The irony was not lost on us. He had used her, and she, in her own way, had tried to use us. The cycle of manipulation had finally broken, but it had broken on her wedding day. In the days that followed, the silence from Sophia was absolute. No calls, no texts, no furious accusations. We heard through the grapevine that Julian had indeed disappeared, leaving Sophia with a mountain of debt and a shattered reputation. Her carefully curated social media presence went dark. Our friends, those who knew what we had done, were divided. Some praised our courage, others condemned our methods, saying we had destroyed our own daughter's happiness. But happiness, built on deceit and exploitation, was no happiness at all, we reasoned. Richard and I sat in our quiet home, a profound emptiness settling in. The pain of losing Sophia was still there, sharp and persistent, but it was now overlaid with a sense of grim justice. We had saved her from a manipulative predator, even if she couldn't see it, even if she hated us for it. We had stood up for ourselves, for our dignity, and for the love we had given so freely, only to have it trampled upon. I looked at a framed photo on the mantelpiece, a younger Sophia, beaming, clutching a drawing she had made for me. "Best mom ever," it read in shaky crayon. A tear traced a path down my cheek. I knew our relationship with Sophia, as we knew it, was over. Perhaps one day she would understand. Perhaps one day she would forgive us, or at least understand why we did what we did. Until then, we would carry the weight of our decision, knowing that sometimes love means letting go, and sometimes it means delivering the harshest truth, even when it shatters everything in its path. Her big day had ended, but perhaps, in its ashes, a truer, if more painful, beginning could finally emerge for her and for us.